Welcome to another edition of Eat Better South Africa Live. Thank you so much for joining us. You with me, Masuda, and we're coming to you live today from Medicross in Kenilworth. Most of you know Eat Better South Africa is the community's outreach arm of the Noakes Foundation, and our aim is to take the benefits of a low carbohydrate lifestyle and make it accessible to South Africans from all walks of life. Our hot topic for today is diabetes, more specifically the management of diabetes using a low carbohydrate approach. And who better to do that with than Medical Director of both the Noakes Foundation and the Nutrition Network, Dr. Neville Wellington. Dr., thank you so much for making yourself available.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to having a chance to speak to people who would really like to know and to really make a difference to their diabetes, because we've seen such amazing results and such amazing improvements with patients when they use the low carb methods or lifestyle, to actually treat their diabetes. And, we are able to make big changes and hopefully prevent people from getting all the bad side effects of diabetes.
Great, thanks. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Fatima, Henry, Asanda, thank you so much for tuning in. And again, I'm going to encourage you. We use this platform because we want to make it interactive. We want to make it engaging. So we encourage all of you to please ask your questions. And we'll try our best to get through all of them as best as we can. So we're going to jump straight into it. Doc, you've been in practice for over 20 years.
Yes, amazingly.
So when did you decide to incorporate a low carbohydrate approach to the management of diabetes?
Yeah, it's almost been 25 years actually. And
wow.
When I first started in practice, the diabetes epidemic was really just starting. In the it was the sort of early 1990s, late 80s, and I was beginning to see more and more diabetes patients coming through our practice. And I felt that I needed to get to do more. And I did a couple of clinical trials, and of course with the pharmaceutical, they were pushing the drugs and the insulins, and I did some studies with them. And I thought that I knew a bit about diabetes, but I realized that actually this was really starting to increase our practices. So I felt that I needed to learn more. So in about 2010, there's a group up in Johannesburg called the CDE. They were doing some courses, and I joined one of their week's courses, and they then recommended that I should do a diploma for diabetes. And I didn't really realize you could do it. But through the University of Cardiff, they ran this diploma course that allowed me to do 2 years of studying on diabetes. And what was fascinating about it was that I learned that, there's tons of medications and ways that you could treat it, but very little was understood or recommended in terms of the lifestyle. The lifestyle that was recommended when I was studying was a low-fat lifestyle. And yet they said very categorically that carbohydrates increase your glucose levels. But the understanding was carbohydrates increase your glucose levels, but you must just give treatment to bring it down again, which didn't seem to make sense. But the prevailing dogma at the time was that carbohydrates are essential for your life, and you have to have about 60%. The American Diabetes Association said 60% of your food should be carbohydrates. And I studied this, and I thought, well, that's interesting, but why? And I couldn't really find any good reasons why they were saying that. It was just because we say so, eventually. That was really what I was. But it was about the second year that I was studying this, that Prof. Noakes then sent out an email. Well, in fact, he sent out a letter to all of us GPs, and he'd sort of come out of the closet, as it were, in terms of his low-carb changes, and he'd been doing this for a year. And he spoke about it. And anyway, I was busy in the course, and I was so busy, and I thought, well, let me look at this letter. And I gave it to my wife. She said, oh, but this is like Atkins. I've done that before. Anyway, but if Prof says it, then it must be fine. So she started doing it, lost some weight, felt so much better. And then when I got to the end of the course, it was then patients were starting to come through that were saying to me, gee, I've heard Prof Noakes, what do you think? I said, well, I think actually he may be onto something. So I reread his letter, and then I looked at all his references, and I thought, hang on, there is something here. And then I saw some improvements with patients because they had been doing what Prof was suggesting. And that was 2012. So it was just at the time that he said. And I also looked at this, and as I've gone through the course, I began to think, but this doesn't make sense to increase glucose levels all the time. And we know, I mean, there's a whole science behind how cardiovascular disease is caused by increasing glucose levels. And yet they were saying, take more. So it didn't quite make sense. It's just this kind of like cognitive dissonance that occurs. And so I then started thinking, well, I wonder if this really does work, because I then had some patients coming through that had remarkable responses to their glucose levels, their triglycerides are coming down, their blood pressures were coming down, they were losing weight, and they were all feeling so much better. So I thought, well, before I kind of start recommending this, I better read everything. So I read all these references. He was then on the radio talking about some things I used to listen to. It was a radio station called CCFM, and he would often give references in books. One of them, in fact, was, sorry, I'm going to just get this out here, was this book, Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution. And so I thought, wow, okay, so I Googled it, found it, got it delivered, and read it, and started thinking, hang on, this is a completely different world. I've never, we just had not been told about it. So having done all that, I then decided, let me try it myself. Because I can't just recommend it to patients. Surely, is it sustainable? Do you feel okay? And found that even in my own life, that cutting out a lot of carbohydrates and bread. That I wasn't diabetic. I didn't have any symptoms of metabolic syndrome. I was an athlete. I was running. I was cycling, and but I still found some remarkable improvements. My August cycle time improved. I felt better cycling, and it kind of went from there. So really, since 2012 now, I've been recommending low-carb lifestyles, been tracking patients, and I just, it astounds me how much improvement people get in terms of their lifestyle, in terms of how they feel, in terms of their cardiovascular improvements, obviously their diabetes improvements. I've had patients, literally I would say, if you define a reversal as getting your HbA1c below 6.5%, I would say more than 50% of the patients I see have done that.
That is brilliant.
So it's been a remarkable journey. Obviously there's going to be patients who just don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And they know what to do, and it's like smokers, they know they should stop, but
it's difficult.
It's
and we'll
difficult,
get into that.
But so that was my journey. So it started, and it's been fascinating.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's get straight into it. So a lot of people, they hear about diabetes, they think insulin, they understand that it's an increase in blood sugar, but let's try and get a proper understanding of it. What is diabetes, and what is the difference between type 1 and type 2?
Okay, well, type 1 is probably easier to explain. Okay. Essentially, your body has an organ called the pancreas, and that pancreas has cells that produce insulin. And insulin is really what we call an anabolic hormone. It maintains things in your body. So it maintains your glucose levels, it maintains your fat levels, it maintains a whole lot of parts of your body. And it's essential for you to have insulin to survive. It controls your liver's production of glucose. And in type 1 diabetes, really what happens is there's an antibody response to the cells that produce insulin. It attacks the cells, and patients stop producing insulin. And it's quite a quick onset. It usually occurs in children. It starts in children, but it can be any time in life. Okay. But most of the time, you'll see children from 2 years onwards, and I've got a few patients who are 2 years old. Sort of peaks probably, I would say, most commonly between about 9 and 14. So that we see the majority of children when they are discovered with diabetes. And as I say, it's a range. And usually what happens is they drop their insulin levels. They can't control their glucose anymore. Their glucose levels start spiking. When you have a lot of glucose in your bloodstream, it causes what we call osmotic pressure. It causes the kidneys to try and get rid of the glucose. But when you try and get rid of the glucose, you get rid of a lot of water with it because you need to. And so the children will start passing a lot of urine. they start feeling thirsty, they might lose weight, they just look unwell, and it's usually quite a quick onset. So that, they can literally be a week before be totally fine, and a week later they're running these high sugars, and if they get, and sometimes they can be really seriously ill, go into what we call diabetic ketoacidosis, which is often the first time you realize that these children are diabetic. So that's kind of type 1. So type 1 is where patients just don't have enough insulin. They're not overweight, they haven't had, they don't necessarily have other problems, but something's attacked their immune system, and it's caused the insulin to stop. Predominantly, if we look at the overall population of diabetes, probably type 1 only make up about 5% of patients with diabetes, which, unfortunately, when you look at the total number of diabetes, how much it's climbed, type 1 is also climbed for some reason. We're not 100% sure why, but obviously there's some triggers in the environment that is setting that off. So that's the first. Then type 2 diabetes is a different problem, in that you don't lose your insulin ability, you don't lose the ability to make insulin, but your body somehow stops responding to it. Now, I've got a lot of theories about why that happens, and I think that sugar has got a great role to play in that, specifically the fructose that we eat, which is part of the sugar molecule, and it tends to cause damage to the liver. You get what we call a fatty liver, and a fatty liver doesn't seem to respond that well to insulin. Your liver makes glucose, it doesn't seem to shut down, so you get these increasing glucose levels through the night, through the day. You wake up, your sugars are high, and the insulin that you produce, there is actually quite a lot of insulin, because when we've done studies on patients who are making insulin with type 2 diabetes, we find the insulin levels are high, they're not low. So they are producing enough insulin, but they're just not controlling their glucose levels. And unfortunately, when they eat something with sugar in it, it spikes the sugars very high, and they just can't control it as well. So it's really it's a mismatch between the amount of glucose they're producing and the glucose that they're eating and the insulin response. So, and unfortunately, because insulin, as we said, is an anabolic hormone, it also grows fat, tries to convert the glucose into fat. So people who, even long before they're diabetic, they probably had high insulin levels, and they would have gained weight, and then there's obviously some sort of tip over point. And some people will find that sometimes a shock will set them off, and they, so they'll say that, oh, I had a death in the family, or I was in a car accident, and suddenly I was diabetic. Maybe, but it's clearly just a massive adrenaline response, cortisol levels, and that suddenly set off this glucose, and you suddenly feel it. But most people who are type 2 diabetic don't really feel that ill to start off with. The most common symptoms I see with patients who I pick up as type 2 are probably a bit of fatigue, not feeling, they sort of feel like they're just not really coping, but generally not that much. Sometimes they'll get a bit of, sometimes they'll present with recurrent infections like thrush or urinary tract infections, or even skin infections. So things like that, we would want to go and check those patients to see if they haven't got diabetes. And then, but most of the time we're picking them up randomly. They'll have a test at a pharmacy, or a friend will do a test, or they'll come in for a checkup, and we'll do a test and find, oh, you're diabetic.
This ties in very nicely with a question we've got from, and please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing this right, Fekeleli Dlamini. How do I know I have diabetes? Where to start, or rather what tests to start with at the doctor or the lab?
Yeah, so obviously if you suspect it, you must go to the doctor, and the doctor then will do a number of tests. I mean, the easiest test that we do first is a finger prick glucose test. So we'll see if that's high. Generally, that's not accepted as the test to define diabetes. Obviously, once you are diagnosed with diabetes, in a sense, you seem to have it for life. So, for instance, the insurance companies would load you because of that. The medical aids would want you to be on their chronic programs, and you need to be sure that you are diabetic. So you normally need to then send what we call a fasting blood glucose. So you need to not have eaten for about 8 to 10 hours, come in the morning and send off a blood test to the laboratory, and they then need to check it. The level that we're looking at for a glucose blood test is above 7 to confirm diabetes.
Okay.
So anything below 7, in fact, from 5.6 to about 7 is seen as pre-diabetes. So if your glucose level, even if you're not diabetic, you could still be pre-diabetic for a fasting glucose. Then there's another test which we don't do very often anymore. Is if somebody does come back and they're sort of borderline between maybe 6.5 and 7 or just over 7, we might do something called a glucose tolerance test.
Okay.
So a glucose tolerance test is we give a patient 75 grams of glucose, we put it in water, we get them to drink it, and then we measure their glucose levels for 2 hours.
Okay.
And usually that gives us an idea. So if their glucose levels after 2 hours is above 11.1, they would then be defined as having diabetes. Okay. And then the third test we do is something called the HbA1c. A lot of people now seem to know about the HbA1c, but the HbA1c is a blood test. You don't have to fast for it, which is why the Americans love it, because they don't like to stop eating. Sorry.
It's all the Americans on the group
side.
side.
But anyway, you don't have to fast for it. It's a test that measures damage to proteins on the hemoglobin molecule, on your red cell molecule. And one of the reasons why we know that glucose causes damage is, well, it causes damage to lots of high glucose levels, causes damage to many proteins in the body. So the HbA1c measures the damage to your hemoglobin molecules, and we measure it as a percentage. There are some other measures, but the easiest one that most people like is the percentage. And if it's above 6.5%, in other words, 6.5% of the molecules are damaged, then you have diabetes. And the aim is to get it below 6.5%.
6.5%. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so there is this idea that chronic disease, specifically diabetes and hypertension, is genetic. How much of it is based on your hereditary factors, and how much of it can actually be controlled by your diet?
That's a fascinating question, because it kind of says, well, if you've got parents who had diabetes, then your chance of having diabetes is great.
Yeah.
And the interesting point with this is that diabetes wasn't here to the extent that it was, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And your great-great-grandparents weren't necessarily diabetic, but yet you've got 2 or 3 generations of diabetes. So clearly there's some genetic predisposition to having diabetes. So, and if you look at studies, so for type 1 diabetes, there's actually not a great genetic response. In other words, we don't see every single type 1 diabetic having children having type 1 diabetics, but it does happen. And I think it's about, if your father's type 1 diabetic, you've got about a 10% chance of being type 1 diabetic. It's something in that range, even less sometimes. But if your parents are type 2 diabetic, and both of them are, and you live in the same environment and eat the same things that they eat, you've probably got about a 70 to 80% chance of becoming diabetic. Okay, so I think it's that it's both, but that the lifestyle factors are playing more of a role. Yeah. And for instance, many years ago in Natal, there was a doctor there called Dr. George Campbell, and he was tracking this upsurge in diabetes amongst the Zulu and the Indian population. And it was a time if you know Natal is a sugar growing area of South Africa, and the sugar canes were really increasing in the 1960s. So in about the 1960s, he started seeing a lot of these patients coming through. And many of them, their parents or their predecessors didn't have diabetes. It was a new phenomenon. And what he looked at is he looked at the amount of sugar that they were eating. So not just what they were eating, but also the amount of cool drinks. Fanta was very popular in those days.
Remember that Fanta grape?
Yeah, Fanta grape is so high in sugar, but Fanta orange and all those sort of things had a lot of sugar in it. And he tracked them. And what he found is, the other thing that it was a bit like, they were paid in sugar. They would actually paid. So you get a packet of sugar at the end of your week. This would be your payment, partially for working on the sugar cane. And what he found is that if you had, he said it was 70 pounds of sugar per year for 20 years, you would become a diabetic. And it didn't really matter whether you had parents who did or didn't. Which if you work it out, and I kind of played around with the numbers, and it comes out at about 20 to 22 teaspoons of sugar a day for 20 years. And actually, when you start thinking about how much sugar we're eating in terms of carbohydrates, it's not very difficult to realize that we are, I mean, the average amount of sugar consumed in America, for instance, at the moment, is 100 pounds of sugar per person per year.
That is.
So, and those are graphs that are shown. I mean, over the last century, the amount of sugar consumed has just climbed. There was a decline during the 2 wars, but for the rest, it just was a straight line up. So you can imagine it's 100 pounds of sugar. It's like 30 to 40 teaspoons of sugar a day. That's the average.
Wow.
So you can imagine some people are way above the average.
Of course.
So that is, so genetics, so I don't know if it fully answers your question, but I think if you've got parents who have got diabetes, you need to be really being careful about what you're eating and what they're eating, because your risk of getting diabetes if they've got it is going to be higher.
Yeah.
So you need to start looking at your lifestyle.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Because I feel like some people get really comfortable. People don't really want to put in the work or the effort.
Yes.
And it's, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So there's always this idea of, it's in my family, and if I'm bound to get it, I'm bound to get it. But you do have control.
And you do have a choice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so how do you go about advising your diabetic patients to manage their diabetes using a low carbohydrate diet? Let me just say hello to Nikki and hello to Jane. Jane is joining us all the way from the US. She's currently there for the Low Carb USA conference. So hello, Jane. Thank you for tuning in.
Okay. So, look, it's really a process so most of the patients I see, very few of them are obviously newly diagnosed. Patients come and see me, they get referred by friends or by other doctors, or they've heard about me through something like this. And most of them are on a number of medications. So the first thing I usually try and do is I try to just get to understand what's going on in their lives. You know, what are they eating? So normally I take a history as to how long they've had diabetes for. What are they eating? What's their breakfast? What do they snack on? What do they eat for lunch? What's their supper, etc., etc. And that's always very revealing, because very quickly you realize that they're easily eating 30 to 40 teaspoons of sugar a day.
Sure.
You know, and that's the kind of first step. The second step is that I actually ask patients to go and do some testing. So most diabetes patients have been given glucose monitors. So wherever they are, they've normally been given a glucose monitor, but the problem is they don't use them very well. They don't use them properly. Most people just test their sugars in the morning, for instance, which honestly, all it tells you is that you're diabetic, you know, because the levels will usually be between 7, 8, 9, and they haven't really, it doesn't tell you much about what you're eating, etc., etc., and what food is doing to your body. So we know that when you eat food, your glucose levels will rise quite rapidly and usually peak at about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, depending on what you've eaten.
Okay.
And the problem is if you test before meals and you don't test after the meal, you don't actually see what the meal has actually done to your glucose levels. And we know that the rises in blood glucose levels affect your HbA1c. So what I do is I give patients a sheet. It looks a bit like this. I'll just quickly show it if it's okay. It looks a bit like this. Hopefully that'll come out fairly clearly. But really what it is number of blocks, and the first will be date and time, and then along there will be what was your glucose reading before meal, what did you eat, and what your glucose reading is an hour to an hour and a half afterwards. And that gives you a really good idea of what happens. And so, for instance, this is a patient that I've got some readings from, he's filled them in very nicely. And you can see he actually started quite high, over there, 18, and literally started following a low-carb diet, tested. And by the end of the week, he was already down to in his 6s.
That is absolutely amazing.
And, you know, so what I do is I ask patients, please go and test. I don't change anything on their medication to start off with. I don't dabble around with too much stuff. I'm just trying to gather data.
Okay.
So the first 2 weeks. So then I send them off. I send them, and if they don't have a machine, I give them a machine. And then you can download it, and very quickly. So they all then bring in their machines. And as usual, I've got lots of cords on my computer here. But you can see that this is one patient who started off there, and very quickly after 3 months, he was pretty much normal.
Absolutely.
And that was just, and he followed a very quite low carb diet. He was very, one of the amazing patients. I mean, and I've got actually quite a lot of these patients who are incredible. And that basically will show you what works. So in real terms, what tends to happen is that when patients are testing and seeing which foods spike or make their sugars go higher, they learn that they actually need to eat less of those foods or cut them out completely. And then they find meals that they are able to, that they can eat that controls their glucose levels, doesn't spike their glucose levels. And by and large, it's low carb foods. So let's be honest. Yeah. So if they, the other thing I teach them, is I teach them carbohydrates. So firstly, I find out what they're eating. Mm-hmm. Second thing, I tell them about testing. But the third thing is I actually do explain to patients what are carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So, and for, I don't know if you want me to just quickly give a brief overview of that.
Sure, please.
So we measure carbohydrates in grams. Carbohydrates are really all foods that will break down to glucose, fructose, and galactose. So when you eat it, it gets digested in your gut and broken down to the very basic molecules. Mm-hmm. So glucose and fructose, and that's what gets absorbed, and that's what gets into the bloodstream. Fructose goes into the liver very quickly. Glucose goes and circulates around the blood, and that's what causes your glucose levels to rise. So we measure that in grams. We know that, for instance, a teaspoon of sugar is about 5 grams of carbs. Mm. So when people get that, they understand, okay, a teaspoon of sugar is 5 grams of carbs. If you look at bread labels, and I teach patients how to read labels. Yeah. So labels will tell you the total carbohydrates is actually what you want to know. It's not really which is sugar or anything like that. It's just the total carbohydrates. That's actually what is going to be broken down to glucose in your body. So, for instance, a slice of bread generally is about 15 grams of carbs. So a slice of bread generally will become 3 teaspoons of sugar in your body. Sorry. Most plates of cereal will be about 30 grams of carbs, about 6 teaspoons of sugar. And that's without even adding glucose or sugar onto the food. For instance, fruit. I've had 2 or 3 patients this morning already who've said to me, "But fruit, they haven't been able to cut out their fruit, and they keep spiking." In fact, one lady phoned me back 2 weeks ago and said, "My sugars aren't coming down." I said, "Have you cut out the fruit?"
Yeah.
She said, "No, not really." And when she cut out the fruit, it improved dramatically. But generally, a banana, for instance, will contain 30 grams of carbs, which is about 6 teaspoons of sugar. It really is the highest sugared fruit. Mm. But an apple is around about 20 grams of carbs. An orange, probably between 15 and 20. But all of these will tend to spike your sugars, and often people don't. It's amazing. Many people see fruit as neutral, and they've been told to eat 5 fruit a day.
Exactly, yeah.
And unfortunately, that just doesn't, for diabetics, it doesn't help. Maybe if you're not a diabetic and a fruit here and there is not going to be a problem, but certainly not for diabetes patients, because it is going to spike the sugars and it's going to keep them spiking and remain high for long periods of time. So it takes about 4 to 6 hours for your glucose levels to return to what they were before the meal. If they're high before the meal, they're not going down to below normal, to normal, and so they tend to stay high. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your glucose levels to remain normal, and then to control them that way.
So for diabetics, we with a low carbohydrate diet, we encourage 25 grams of carbs daily.
Yeah. So if they're testing correctly in that, in fact, most of them get there.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard Bernstein, the book that I showed you earlier, he found that he could control his diabetes, and he worked out that he basically he couldn't go more than about 10 grams per meal. So, which would be 2 biscuits, 2 of those cracker breads or something like that. But that's really the maximum. But I mean, if you're going to eat a fruit or half a fruit, if you're going to eat a plate of cereal, and you weigh over your daily, very quickly, your daily allowance, but even your meal allowance. Mm-hmm. So that works out about 30 grams a day.
Okay.
So either we tell people they go do that, or they find it out for themselves by testing.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, and that's what I've really found is I try and empower people to test more, because if I tell them, yes, if I told everybody to go follow a low-carb diet, or I gave them a strict low-carb diet, they would improve.
Yeah.
But if they tested and actually saw for themselves, it would help them a lot more.
What it's doing to the body,
Yeah.
when you're seeing it with your own eyes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to get to one of the questions that came up earlier, because I
Sure,
feel like it
sure.
ties in very nicely with this discussion. I'm just going to go up there. What would someone who's doing a strict low-carb diet for months, or almost a year, have a fasted morning blood sugar level of 5.8, and then
Yes.
after eating or drinking
Yes.
bulletproof coffee, it goes down to 4.7?
Okay, so that is that's a brilliant question, because what really happening there is what is absolutely normal to everyone. And I've tested this myself. I test every glucose monitor. I've tested everything. So I've seen it in myself as well. And what tends to happen in the morning, it's not a normal problem, but it's called the dawn phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that when you wake up in the morning, overnight you've been not eating, but your liver makes glucose all the time. Our bodies will always have a basal level of glucose.
Okay.
So our normal level of glucose is usually between about 4 and 6. Okay. We store it as we make glucose in our body from protein and fat. We use fat for the energy, and we make protein. It's called the process is called gluconeogenesis. Genesis, making of new glucose. Gluconeogenesis. Does that make sense? And what happens is that gets stored as in a pockets called glycogen. And when you wake up in the morning, you have what we call the dawn phenomenon, which is where you release adrenaline, you release cortisol. It's kind of getting you ready for the day. It's a sudden sort of stimulatory event that happens. And if you had tested it even a few minutes before, you probably would have been a bit lower, and then you spike, you wake up and you produce adrenaline, and then your sugars spike a little bit, and then they come down later. And usually what we find, and we see this with diabetics, they actually have a higher response, they have a more abnormal response for dawn phenomenon, so that's why they have sugars over 7.
Okay.
But if you track your glucose levels very nicely during the day, you'll find that they'll come right down. So this lady, the person who found that, when she ate food as well, she released some insulin. There's a hormone called GLP-1 that the moment you eat anything, it doesn't really matter whether it's protein, fat, or whatever, your gut releases a hormone called GLP-1, which causes a rise in insulin. Insulin will then bring down your glucose levels again, but not to abnormal levels. Most of us will get down to maybe 3.5 at the lowest. Occasionally, I've seen mine at 3.3 or something, but without feeling any problems. And then for the rest of the day, it will be fine. So it's not really an abnormal response, but it is diabetics everybody wants to have their sugar at like 5.
Yeah.
But actually, you're going to find your morning readings are going to be a bit high. But if you test it for the rest of the day, usually you find your lowest reading, if you've been following a fairly low carb diet, is around about before supper.
Okay, so would that be the most effective time then to test?
Yes. So if you really want to know if you're controlling well, and actually, if you look at this patient, which is, so almost all my patients, when we're testing them 3 or 6 times a day, you'll find that their morning readings are quite high. So this guy's, okay, he's come down to 7.8, 7. But if you look at his before dinner ones, they're all 5.4s, 5.5, 5.7, 5.8. So actually, it's quite important that if you really want to know whether you're controlling, is to test the before supper reading as well. So if somebody's going to test, if they just want to test twice a day, then the before, when they wake up, and then the before supper ones are probably better. Okay. And then obviously, she's having a fatty coffee or bulletproof coffee, which is, it's still going to release some insulin because of the GLP-1 release.
Okay, great. Thank you for that question, Yana.
Yes.
All right, so is there a difference in carb allowance for those that are insulin dependent and those that are not, that are just managing their diabetes with medication?
No. So if you follow Dr. Bernstein's solution and you follow what he's recommending, he's basically following about 30 grams a day, and that's what we're recommending for type 2 diabetics. So, and in type 1 diabetics, there's definitely a correlation between how many carbs you eat and how much insulin you eat, and they call that the carb to insulin ratio, and that's what we've been doing for so many years.
Yeah.
So, you eat more carbs, okay, 30 grams of carbs because you have 2 slices of bread, therefore you need if you normally find that one slice takes 4 units of insulin, now for 2 slices you need 8 units of insulin. That's kind of what they try and do. The problem with that is that the more carbs you have, the greater margin for error you have. And the more insulin you take, the greater margin for error you have as well. So the greater risk you have of going too high or too low. And obviously we know that insulin, one of the big problems is having these sudden lows and not getting it quite right. And when you're on high doses of insulin, it becomes more and more difficult to control your diabetes. So patients who are not following a low-carb diet of type 1 diabetes tend to have very big spikes, what we call variability. And, so it really actually boils down to testing and finding out what works for you. And I think for most even type 1 diabetics, they'll find that 10 grams of carbs are probably enough. Now, obviously, there's controversy around this because the question arises with children. Surely children should be on high carb diets because they must grow and they must develop. And we've got these. There's a paper going around at the moment saying, well, these children don't thrive, and actually, it's not totally true because I've got some children, and there are children around the world, and there's a group called Type 1 Grit, and you can follow. They've been tracked, and these children are doing fine. And the problem is often when you're trying to get this right, patients often eat too much protein and not enough fat. And so what we can see very clearly in that one study that was out was that actually, and it's from Australia. I see we've got some Australians on the program, and it was produced in Australia, and but you could see very clearly that they were only getting 70% of their nutritional needs in calories, whereas actually they needed a lot more. So it wasn't necessarily the low carb diet that was the problem. It was the fact that they weren't advised on how to get the enough calories in the diet. So of course, because they don't really believe in low carb diets, they said, well, it's a low carb diet. But actually you could see they weren't getting enough protein or fat. In fact, they needed to all increase their fat quite a lot. So children can thrive, I think, quite happily, but it's controversial and they do need to be tracked, and we do need more studies. Of course. But I don't think that children need to be just left to their own devices having bowls of cereal and porridge and cake and bread, and that just ad infinitum, and then trying to just match it with insulin, because it becomes a mess, and your risks are so high in terms of not getting hypos because they need a lot more insulin. And I just think we've got to look at this more differently, and we need to be open to those patients who want to follow this. We need to help them and support them, not make them feel like they're causing child abuse, which is.
And within your practice itself, what's the success rate been specifically amongst children with type 1 diabetes following a low carb diet?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. It's difficult. It's not an easy. It's not an easy thing to follow. You need to have your entire family involved, and the parents need to be very committed to it, and they need to be committed to testing rigorously and monitoring rigorously. And those that have done it, and I've got a couple that have been able to maintain pretty well. I mean, most of the type 1 diabetes patients I'm seeing are older. They're in their sort of post-teens. I've got 2 or 3 children, and they've struggled, but when they've done it, they really do actually thrive quite well. And so I'd like to see a lot more of those children coming through. But it's difficult there because the moment they go into the clinics, they get told, no, you can't do this, it's impossible, it's wrong. And so they're very conflicted.
And that's just the thing, especially with people that want to adopt a low carbohydrate lifestyle. It is a lifestyle modification.
Yes,
it's difficult. I mean, I heard someone say to me, changing your diet is like changing your religion, really. So people struggle with that, and a lot of people are afraid to do the clean cut approach, which is I'm going to stick to 25 grams of carbs a day. Some people prefer weaning themselves off until they feel that they're strong enough to stick to the 25 grams a day. Is that effective when it comes to diabetics, and is it something that you encourage?
Whatever way you can do it. I mean, I've had a couple of patients who've been able to go cold turkey, cut the carbs, and they do well. They do fantastic, like this example of this patient I showed you here. But I would say the vast majority of people would be kind of following a more moderate weaning type approach. And, usually, I mean, for many patients with diabetes, the first thing they need to cut out are the fruit juices and the cool drinks. Just get rid of those. That'll take out a lot of the spikes.
Yeah.
The next thing is I encourage is, look at your cereals. Try and cut down on them or find other alternatives. Look at eating eggs or fatty meat food, or a lot of people quite like avocados and so eggs and avocado with some meat, and then looking at your bread. Look at cutting down on bread. Instead of having 4 slices at lunch, can you not get to 2 or 1?
Yeah.
And trying to find alternatives, and slowly, and then also with the testing, they will start to see quite quickly where it starts to improve.
Yeah.
So and I do find that's an approach. And obviously there are people who do it and then go off it and then do it and then go. But as I find, as they come back to me and as we keep encouraging them, often they will start to get it better and better. So I don't think we can just say we must just do one way or one way works. I think everybody's on a journey in this. Absolutely. We're all learning. Yeah. We're all trying to find the best way. So I think we've just got to keep encouraging them. Mm-hmm. And certainly the more we see patients, the better it is for them, because they we all like to please people, so they like to bring their stuff to the doctor and show all the nursing. I've got a diabetes educator as well, and then obviously the dietitians and that. So all of that helps to support them. But also people don't like to come back to the doctor if they haven't been that well controlled. Yeah. So suddenly somebody's missed an appointment. I usually try and phone, what's happened? Well, whatever. It could have been just the fact that they haven't quite got it right, but that's fine. I'm not here to condemn people or for them to feel bad. That's not the thing. It's here to support them and to help them on their journey.
Absolutely. And then we get people that follow a strict low carbohydrate diet, let's say Monday to Friday, and then come the weekend and they decide, okay, it's cheat weekend, and they rely on the fact that they can use their medication or use their insulin to regulate their sugars. Is that advisable? What impact does it have on the body, and is that okay?
Yes. I mean, ideally, we don't want to be having cheat weekends and that. The problem is, it's a bit more complicated than just what. We're like that. We like humans. I've done well, therefore I've got a bonus. I can do this and spend all the money or whatever. So this is building up a bonus. I can build my carbs until I keep my 30 grams all in one go. And what unfortunately tends to happen then is that if you look at some of the studies where they've looked at how long does it take for inflammation to settle after a high glucose load. So, for instance, there was some studies done where they looked at arterial cells. Obviously, arterial cells are the first port of call where you're going to get damaged, because glucose flowing through the bloodstream gets taken up into endothelial cells, the cells that damage that line the arteries. So they looked at those and they said, well, they pushed up the glucose levels for a day, or 16 hours, in fact, was what they did in the study. And they then tracked the inflammatory markers afterwards. And they found that it took almost 2 weeks for those inflammatory markers to come down.
Wow.
So it's not just the fact that you're able to control the glucose quite quickly, but it's the time that your body takes to heal. There is actually healing that needs to take place there. Yeah. So when you do that, have cheats here and there, unfortunately what's happening is you're not giving your body a chance to actually heal. And it's going to take time to heal the damage that high glucose levels have done. And then you've got to give your body time to kind of almost readapt. Yeah. So it's not a great idea to be cheating every now and then. And I mean, I understand we're human. So for those who are following 5 days and then 2 days off are probably doing better than those who are not doing any days off. Yeah. So I would say, well, thank goodness they're at least having some low days or good days. But still, it would be better if we could get more longer periods where you give your body a chance to heal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. That was very informative, because I know my dad's guilty of that. And then we know diabetics have been told to eat at least 6 times a day. With a low carbohydrate approach, how do we manage that? People are just afraid of not eating that many times because it seems to be ingrained in us. How do we manage that with the low carb?
Yeah, that myth has been driven, and really it's been driven from the fact that type 1 diabetes patients are at risk for having hypoglycemia. So you take your injection, you eat your food, and then 2.5 hours later or 3 hours later, you can hit a low because you're taking too much insulin. So instead of saying, we'll take less insulin and eat better, what the medical community has said, no, well, just eat again at the sort of 3 hours, and then so you don't go too low, and then the next meal you have your insulin. And so what's happened is so it's become this sort of myth that diabetes patients must eat 6 times a day, and in fact, but it's one of those things like old housewife's tale, you know, the woman who cuts off the end of the lamb because, and the daughter does, and you ask why, and the mother says, well, actually my stove was a bit too small, but everybody else's was, you know, that kind of, it's a perpetuation of something that actually we haven't really thought about. Yeah. Whereas, so really we shouldn't be doing that. We really have to get away from that, because unfortunately what happens is it keeps spiking the glucose levels all the time, and so you just run high and you can't ever catch up. You can't ever allow your body to catch up. And if you think about when you look at studies that have looked at how long does it take for glucose levels to kind of come back to normal, how long does it take for insulin levels to come back to normal, it takes about 4 to 6 hours. So if in between that time you're spiking your glucose levels again, you're not allowing your body to ever get to a basal state. So, which is why actually intermittent fasting is such an important part of diabetes management, because you need to allow your body to get kind of to its basal rate, insulin levels to go down, so that you're not spiking, you're not continuing to grow fat. You have to start utilizing. You want to utilize fat.
Of course.
So we really need to encourage, especially the type 2 diabetics, to really have long periods of time between their meals, and which is why, in fact, many people recommend only maybe 2 meals, maximum 3 meals a day.
3 meals a day, but obviously following then eating within the low carb criteria. I just want to acknowledge a few people here. We've got fantastic international audience. We've got David Quito joining us from Puerto Rico. Thank you so much for that. We've got Joey from Canada. We've got Fatima Fo from Australia. Joe Brown from Australia. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It's just incredible to see that this is getting such a great international reach. We've got other questions that we'd like to address. David Quito wants to know, what do you think about carb cycling? Dr. Merkel, I hope I'm saying that right. Merkel recommends cycling the low carb lifestyle with some days of a higher carb, between 150 even 200 grams.
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on whether you're diabetic or not. So a lot of guys who are not diabetic find that that's helpful for their own health and that, and so there are people who do 5-2 in that. That's for a non-diabetic patient, really.
Oh, I see.
So it's not really for those. I wouldn't recommend that for a diabetes population, but certainly for those who are not insulin resistant, who are not carbohydrate intolerant or whatever. They probably can tolerate that fine and can do that. And there's some studies to show that actually helps with weight loss.
Okay.
You know, so I'm not against any of those things per se, as long as if you're diabetic, you've got to be tracking your glucose. And what I said earlier would apply to that.
Yeah.
But again, you know, there has to be an individualized approach to this. So many of the patients I do, obviously, I try and do individual care, and for patients who want to try that, and maybe for somebody who's trying to lose weight, maybe a 5-day, 2-day, it does work for them.
Okay.
Or even from an exercise well-being point of view, or just from the fact that they're tired of doing well, the environment is just so harsh, difficult to do it. But I don't think it's going to harm you if you're not diabetic to do that for a bit. Okay.
And then we've got a question from Henry Retief. What is your opinion on Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, and do you see a role for the LCHF lifestyle in its treatment?
Sure. I agree with that statement that actually Alzheimer's type 3 is kind of what we call type 3 diabetes. It's been bandied around for a while, and there's very good understanding of why it does that. And one of the reasons is why it is a problem, and what we think ends up causing Alzheimer's. Now, there's some really good, interesting papers written on this. And one of the understandings is, and when you go back to kind of understanding what causes heart disease, one of the reasons why certain tissues are damaged more than others is that certain tissues don't have defense mechanisms against glucose, against high glucose spikes. So, for instance, your endothelial cells, they take up glucose by osmosis. So if the glucose in the bloodstream is high, the endothelial cells will take up a lot of glucose and have to try and metabolize it. The other cells that can't really down-regulate the amount of glucose that gets taken up into them is the nerve cells, and in fact some of the tendon cells. So we see, for instance, diabetics are more prone to getting things like rotator cuff syndrome, ligament injuries, and that sort of thing. But the same thing with nerve damage. Now we know peripheral neuropathy is one of the problems that happens with diabetics. And studies have shown that it's the increase in glucose into the cells, the damage that's caused through the release of free radicals. So in the same way, the brain doesn't have, if you think about how we were designed, there was no need. When we were in a fairly low-carb environment, there wasn't really a problem with getting a bit of glucose to the brain. You weren't getting these high levels of glucose. But nowadays, it is a problem. And certainly Alzheimer's has increased quite a bit. And there's quite a lot of science around why it happens, but it's to do with the way that the glucose actually damages the nerve cells. The nerve cells then have to defend themselves against it. There's an increase in amyloid, which is a kind of defense mechanism. Amyloid proteins then bind together, and you start losing brain cells. But it's a very technical, but very much a problem. So, can you treat Alzheimer's with a low-carb diet? Well, there's certainly evidence, and people have seen, there's certainly anecdotal evidence, I would say, for patients who, for instance, use coconut oil and high fats in patients when they have patients who have Alzheimer's, that seems to improve them or certainly help them to be calmer, easier, maybe even improve memory slightly. So I don't know. I would certainly say that if you had Alzheimer's, it would be something that you would recommend. I would recommend, and I would say, really look at the diet quite seriously. But if you committed, then I think a ketone type diet, a high fat diet would really be worth trying in patients with Alzheimer's. But in terms of preventing Alzheimer's, well, we need to be doing that from my age.
Thanks for that. I hope that answers your question, Henri. We've got a question from Sandra, which is a little off topic. The focus of our discussion today was specifically diabetes, but she wants to know about the effectiveness of using low carb to treat high blood pressure. I'm not sure if you'd like to.
Yes, it is effective, and it's because high blood pressure is part of the insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome. So the 5 kind of criteria for metabolic syndrome are raised glucose levels. The original high insulin levels was now converted into abdominal girth. High blood pressure, raised triglycerides, low HDL. So those 5 things. But so it's all part of the same problem, really. Hypertension is the insulin resistance. So if you reduce your insulin resistance by following a low carb diet, blood pressures fall. And I see that all the time. So my diabetic patients, I often find that their blood pressures actually normalize. In fact, some of them to the extent that I need to take them off their blood pressure tablets.
Wow. That is
so it just is part of the continuum. So you might not be diabetic yet, but you might have hypertension, gout, being overweight, pre-diabetic, and you treat them, and then actually their blood pressure improves as well. So it's part of the same problem. So it's not really off the topic. It just is that, it's not treating diabetes. And if you have high blood pressure, I would say you definitely should be on a fairly low carb diet. The problem that people have with what will happen with low carb diets is that people have got this thing in their mind that salt is the problem.
Yes.
So when they go on low carb diets, unfortunately, insulin retains salt from the kidneys. So when they go on low carb diets, they start to lose salt, and then but now they're not taking in salt because they're worried about their blood pressure. Their blood pressure tends to drop because they're not retaining salt as well. And so patients do need to eat salt as well. Do need to keep their salt intake going. Otherwise, and I see this quite often on blood tests where I see that their sodium and chloride levels are a bit low, and we do need to supplement a bit of salt.
How much of salt do you recommend?
Just to taste.
Okay.
I mean, there are graphs there, but I just think people are cutting out salt too much, and it's not the, we say the white stuff's the problem. Well, it's not not the salt, the white stuff, it's the sugar.
The sugar white stuff.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Okay, we've got.
Taking Tamoxifen.
We're just trying to see if there is a question here. Tamoxifen affect the weight loss program? This is from Haley. She's on Tamoxifen. What is that used for? Just to give our audience some clarity.
Sorry, so Tamoxifen is used for patients who've had breast cancer.
Okay.
It's a anti-estrogen hormone that's used for post-treatment of breast cancer. Most patients use it for about 5 years afterwards. And one of the problems with Tamoxifen is it gains weight.
Oh, okay.
So patients struggle to lose weight when they're on it. So certainly while you're off it, if you've had cancer, we would very definitely want to keep away from sugar and high carb diets, because there's the theory that high carb, that cancer is a carbohydrate problem. So following a low carb diet would definitely be recommended, but not it may well help the weight loss. To do that, you have to just play around. If you wanted to lose weight, and the problem with a lot of ladies I see who are trying to lose weight, they just don't get the fat intake quite right, and you need to be careful not to be too low on the fat. Because you eat too much protein, you don't feel it. They actually don't necessarily, they gain a bit of weight sometimes because they convert the excess protein gets converted into glucose, and it can still. So you've got to get the proportions right. So you probably need to see a dietitian who's quite well clued up with low carb diets, or play around yourself. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that question, and congratulations on your recovery, and thank you so much for your courage in sharing that with us. I hope you do find that effective. So overall, we gather that you've been really successful in treating and managing diabetes through a low carbohydrate lifestyle. Do you see this becoming a standard medium of treating diabetes within the medical fraternity? And do you encourage other medical practitioners to try the same approach?
Look, I would love to see it become standard practice. It's crazy to think of it as a diet that we've suddenly discovered, when actually for thousands of years, this is pretty much what we were eating. And we were designed to eat this way. We weren't designed to be pushing carbohydrates in our diet. If you look back in time, we had seasons for things.
Yeah.
We had fruit in season, lasted about 2 months. You would get your vegetables in season, but between then you'd have to hunt and find other things. You had some roots and nuts and that you could eat. But generally, you only had seasons for short seasons. Now we just don't have any seasons. We just eat the whole way through. We import the fruit from the north when we're in winter, and they get ours when we're in summer. And it's just so. I would like to say that we should just go back to normal eating. This is normal eating. This is not it's just become a low carb lifestyle because we have a high carb lifestyle. The problem that we have at the moment is that our environment is such a high carb lifestyle. And, if you go into any of the retail stores, about 80% of the food there contains carbohydrates of 50% or more. If you look at labels, most of the foods are running at 50 grams per 100 grams or more. So to find the foods that aren't that high carb becomes a bit more difficult. But it should be done. And I think we're seeing the results now. And I think even the ADA at the last conference, the American Diabetes Association, there was some allowance for some studies. And they weren't brave enough to say that they were wrong or that this should be. They said, well, it doesn't seem to harm. And the data's inconclusive, which is kind of speak for, well, actually, it seems like it could work. We just need to kind of slowly get to that stage. And I think it will become eventually, I'm hoping over the next few years, become standard practice. That, if you're diabetic, you're going to be given this lifestyle, and you're going to be encouraged, and communities hopefully will start changing as well. And I think we've spoken about it before. One of the issues is getting the community to change into what we call a low-carb lifestyle and to get them on board to eat this way. And because it's very difficult for one person in a family to eat this way,
yes,
and others
absolutely,
aren't.
absolutely.
And it's the same thing is happening in communities. We see it in churches and groups. You go for a function and there's always biscuits and cake and sweets and all sorts of things, whereas we as a community need to become a bit more mindful of what others are going through.
Which is what we try to do with our Eat Better South Africa programs in creating group environments to support these communities into this transition and adopting a low carbohydrate lifestyle. But with that, we also feel that there's got to be support from medical professionals, as you mentioned earlier, and where we need more doctors who are confident enough to have the knowledge and the information at hand, which is why the Nutrition Network is so important. So Dr. Neville Wellington is Medical Director of the Nutrition Network. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Nutrition Network really has been set up to really try and educate our medical colleagues and for them to look at the science and to really debate it. So that we actually can go forward in this. We really want people to see that we can make a difference. So the Nutrition Network has an online course now that medical personnel can join, and we've had a number of people from around the world do the course already. And we're going to continue with webinars. We're going to continue with other courses to really try and just educate doctors on how to do this and to do it safely. It is actually a safe lifestyle. It's not unsafe. We're not trying to harm people. My big thing is that patients should also be monitoring, because that helps to keep people safe. So yeah, we're just trying to educate the broader community and the broader medical community so that it becomes more and more acceptable.
And with that, just to mention, Dr. Wellington is going to be addressing the group on the Nutrition Network through webinars next week, Thursday. So what we've discussed today is really just scratching the surface. That's going to be directed to medical personnel and allied healthcare workers. It's for a nominal fee of $20 for the webinar itself. So we'd encourage you all that are already on the course to please keep an eye out for that. Dr. Wellington, is there anything you'd like to leave us with before we wrap this up?
Well, thank you very much, Masuda, for having me on your webinar, and to all those who joined. It's a fascinating time, and I think many patients have been changing the world because they're the ones who are really doing it. And we're just there to try and support and help, and so for those who are continuing with this journey and really been following it, I really hope that you make a difference in your communities, because it is about community involvement and about encouraging each other and finding novel and creative ways to improve this. Improve the diabetes problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we say this all the time. It takes every single one of us to make a difference. So we really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for joining this live. To help us be part of the answer, Eat Better South Africa is a non-profit organization, and we rely graciously on donations. So if you would like to donate, on our Facebook page, on the top right-hand corner, you'll find the Donate Now button, or you can look for that information on our website, the Noakes Foundation. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found this informative, and if you have, like, love, share, and we'll see you soon for the next one. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.